I first encountered Wyn Cooper's poetry about 6 or 7 months ago. I had come to campus to work, and I had about 20 minutes before work, so I thought I would read some poetry. And I was browsing the BYU bookstore, and I came across Wyn's book titled Chaos is the New Calm, and this spoke to me with a certain ironic accuracy. So I pulled the book off its shelf and ended up calling in sick to work and spending the next 3 hours reading the book in its entirety. This is an entirely true story, by the way. Seriously, I read his whole book and absolutely loved it. His poetry truly enlarged into my world that day. His poems struck me with an unusual power and a pleasure of language. Cooper's language is alive with sounds, rhythms, and surprises. His strange and clever rhyme schemes alter our terms of reference, and in doing so, further our understanding of those terms. As you will soon experience, the emotion of his poetry is expressed in a multiplicity of discourse, ranging from lyric rumination to social commentary. While he is inventive, funny, and emotionally moving, Wyn Cooper also says something real and meaningful about our contemporary culture, something that we can no longer ignore. Chaos is the new calm. Left is the new right. Wyn Cooper has published 4 books of poems as well as a chapbook. His poems, stories, and essays and reviews have appeared in Poetry, Plowshares, Slate, Crazy Horse, Agni, The Southern Review, and more than 60 other magazines. His poems have also been included in 25 anthologies of contemporary poetry. Interestingly, in 1993, his poem Fun was turned into Sheryl Crow's Grammy-winning song All I Want to Do. As poets, we often ask ourselves the question, why don't more people read poetry in America? We ask this question because of poets like Wyn Cooper. Please join me now in welcoming Wyn.
Thank you, Connor. That was fantastic. Whenever I have writer's block or I'm depressed about my work, I will watch the DVD of this reading just to watch your introduction. Can you hear me okay? Everybody? Yeah? Okay. That was fantastic. It really made my day. And thanks to Pat Madden for inviting me here. Dr. Madden, to you. And I am going to read from my second, third, and fourth books, and then I'm going to end with a few new poems. I hope that's okay. As you'll find from my postcard book that I'm going to read from after reading from this, my second book, I write a lot of poems about places that I've never been, and I imagine what they're like. And then sometimes I get lucky and get to go to those places. In fact, I wrote this poem sometime in the 1990s called Firenze, about Florence, as we call it in this country, in Italy, long before I'd ever been to Europe, in fact, and then I ended up getting to go there on my honeymoon. Got to go through a bunch of Italy on my honeymoon 10 years ago this year, so I will start with that poem. Firenze. The women have all gone to Italy. The men have been left behind. The women have gone to see what the men would have kept from them, which the men can no longer have, now that the women have gone to a country shaped like a boot. The men kicked themselves with the boot in their heads where it hurts most. At dawn, they look into the sun toward the ocean across which the women have flown. The women are in Firenze. They burn in the midday sun, and they will burn tonight. The men continue to say Florence and wonder why they were left behind. I also write a lot. I'm going to take this jacket off. I'm a little warm. I noticed this morning as I was going through my poems and deciding what to read to you today that I have written a fair amount of poems about violence, writing about violence between two people or several people or whatever, and trying to elevate that into a metaphor for the violence in our society and on our planet, between the countries. And obviously, there's a lot of that going on these days. So this is one of those poems. It's called Twilight. Behind this barn, two men are fighting, taking turns putting fist to jaw. They roll in the garden, killing the harvest, then stand and gasp and start again. Behind this barn, the sun is setting a little earlier every day. The last light hits the tops of trees, and soon they will fight in the dark. The argument is over money. Neither man has very much. The clouds to the west are yellow and gold, bigger than mountains. The men's faces are red from anger, from blood. Behind this barn, at twilight, in a state far from clarity, two men can be seen hugging each other like long-lost friends. They stand like shadows in shadowless light, and now, again, they fight. On a lighter note, I grew up in Michigan, and we had a next-door neighbor named Eileen Killinger, and she had this great, crazy habit of using almost the right word, but not quite. And she came over one day, and she had a new dress, and my mom was a sort of a part-time seamstress, and so she brought this dress over to my mom to see what my mom thought of it, and maybe have my mom alter it, because she thought the cleavage was too low in the dress. She was a little worried, and she said, I was sitting there at the table with my three sisters and my mother, and none of us will ever forget this. She walked in wearing this dress, and she said to my mom, "Marie, is my gaposis showing?" And we waited till she left, and then we all cracked up and God, she made up another word, gaposis? That's just so crazy. And so for years we made this joke about her, and then one day I thought, what if that really is a word? And what if we've been making fun of her for no good reason? We're the idiots. And so I have 5 dictionaries in my house, looked through all of them, and finally in the biggest dictionary I had, there was the word. And boy, did I feel bad. And she had died by then, so I couldn't apologize to her or anything. But I did read this poem to her daughters, and they got a tear in their eye, but they appreciated it. Anyway, so the poem is called Gaposis, and what it does is it begins with the 4 dictionary definitions of Gaposis, and since it's in very small print, I will have to wear my glasses. Gaposis, noun, informal. A noticeable gap or series of gaps between buttoned buttons or closed snaps on a garment when worn, as when the fabric is stretched out of shape around the fasteners. 2. A synthetic commercialism. 3. From Walk in the Sun, quote, "I'm antisocial, I got gap-osis." That's gap-osis. And then 4, from a book called Nuclear War. Gaposis describes the American public's historical sensitivity to claims of U.S. nuclear inferiority, a missile gap, a bomber gap, an ABM gap, and a window of vulnerability, which I thought fit perfectly with what she was talking about. Anyway, the poem goes like this. Something is bursting the seams of the fabric that contains all we hold dear, that holds it in, shapes it, gives it a life it might not have known. Clothes make us, after all, into something we're not, stretching the wool over our eyes only to take it away. The self under spotlights, walking the runway, waifs waiting in the wings to fly onto and under the covers of glossies. Vague is in vogue. What are you in? And who do you want to look like today? A man, a woman, a manta ray, ready to sting when styles change? Dive to the bottom of the deep blue crinoline cape that waits for you, wrapped around someone you thought you knew. What does gingham say to you? Ellie Mae by the cement pond? Jethro coming out of her closet, shades of scarlet conquering? Don't think of yourself. It's not about you. It's a concept, clothed as a theory, all dressed up and no one to be. That was a lighter note, right? I write in form sometimes. I write my most recent book, Chaos is the New Calm, is entirely composed of 14-line poems, some of which are real, official, by the rules sonnets, and most of them are I'm just trying to push the form and do all different kinds of things with a 14-line poem and make it work like a sonnet but not look like a sonnet. And I have also written some sestinas, which is one of the harder and more interesting forms to write. And when I don't teach regularly anymore, but I do teach occasionally at conferences and things, and I always make students write a sestina. It's really good. It gets people out of their own heads because you have to use the same end words in a different order all the way through the poem, which you will probably hear when I read you this poem. Anyway, this is called Talk. Excuse me. You're going to ask me why I am here, and I'm going to tell you. But I want you to look at the scar on my arm, this one right here in the shape of a mouth, though not a human one. I like to talk about my scars. I like to talk about all kinds of things, but there's no one to talk to most of the time. Wherever I am, I watch, smell the air, don't sleep. I'm the one who listens to the crazies. I listen to you when you look out the window, talking to shapes the snow makes in the yard, covering scars. When you ask what that sound is, I say it's cars. Can't you see them? But instead of talk, you give me a gaze, a look in the shape of how we might look together, and I am sinking and trying not to, sinking toward you down there on the floor, looking up, the one. This is the way one gets to two, one foot then the other, one hand on my scar, waltzing around the kitchen with you, the music, no need to talk of what this means to anyone or why I am here, the shadow on the wall, a miraculous shape. I can see in your mind a thought taking shape. If only you could speak, you'd be the one I came to get, to take away, but I am sorry, I was wrong. I'll cover my scar and leave you here. I won't try to talk to anyone tonight, not me and not you. Just 2 questions before I go. Do you know how I got this scar? Is its shape familiar? Come on, please talk to me. Tell me you bit me. Say you're the one who left a mark on my arm, a little scar to remember you by. I'm asking you, I'm begging, I'm pleading. You're the only one who knows if it's a scar in the shape of what you would say if you would talk. I wrote that poem in Utah, I just realized as I was reading it, when I used to live here. And when I did live here, when I was in the PhD program at the University of Utah, I studied with a poet. I studied with Mark Strand and with Larry Levis. And Larry, unfortunately, had a heart attack and died when he was 49, thanks to a little too much smoking and drinking and whatnot. And anyway, this poem is dedicated to him. And I just found out yesterday via email, there's a woman I know in Virginia who's making a movie about his life. And she you all know Kickstarter.com. She tried to raise $10,000 for the movie, and she ended up raising like $13,000 because so many people are fans of Larry Levis, and all of us who studied with him emailed everybody we knew who knew him and loved his work and whatnot, and the money just started pouring in. So that's really pretty thrilling. Anyway, this poem is dedicated to him, and it's called Leaving the Country. He drifts into a room of strangers who tell stories he thinks he's heard, though they seem different this time, more lurid and real. He's never seen these people before, who seem to know when to use the right word, when to drop their voices to whispers, to say, the last time he came into this room is the last time he went anywhere, and our man wants out but must stay. Each story takes the shape of a square, which works its way around him until he's almost framed. Then he steps out, leaving a maze of open squares all over the room, which itself is a square left open at the door. He tries to shut these voices from his mind, tries to remember the great round world outside these walls, the color and fragrance of summer, the sky at dawn. But all he can hear is the thunder of voices around him, a dozen stories at once boxing him in. He wants to give shape to a story that will leave these people silent, amazed, a story they'll tell over and over after he's gone. His story will be about his leaving, and they'll listen so carefully they won't hear him go out the door or run across the wet summer grass. And one of the strange things about that poem is that I wrote it when he was alive, and it sounds like I wrote it after he was dead. So it kind of haunts me every time I read it. And the last poem I'm going to read from this book is called Frosting, and I've lived in Vermont for 20 years, going on 21, I think. And one of the problems with being a poet and living in Vermont is that everybody invariably asks you what you think of Robert Frost, because he lived in Vermont for much of his life. And I think at one point I just got so sick. I mean, I love Robert Frost. I love his work. And I have many stories I could tell you about Robert Frost. But at one point I just got sick of answering this question, so I wrote this poem. It's called Frosting. The rain is, and in case you don't know much about Robert Frost, he was a fantastic poet, but he really was not a very nice person, especially to his family. He outlived almost everybody in his family. His son killed himself when he was 36. He held a gun to his wife's head at one point and asked the kid, who later killed himself, who do you want to live, mommy or daddy? And this is all documented in biographies of Frost, and so that's why. Well, that's just a very long explanation for this poem. Sorry, I talk too much and don't read enough. Frosting. The rain is crooked as it hits the window, crooked as it falls through the air of this countryside, I mean, in which I live with winding roads, bent trees, corn that follows the contours of hills home. The path is dark and narrow, never straight. It snakes through the wood with offers of apples and brandy. Hey, old man, you want some candy? Clouds in the sky are pentacles. They number 7 and drop the rain acidly down upon us here. The way is clear for us to fall. Good fences, good neighbors, good day to die, and good riddance to nasty old coot. I used to teach at the Frost Place, and I also used to be involved with Breadloaf, the oldest writers' conference I think in the country, up in central Vermont. And one day a year they open Frost's cabin to visitors, and it's during the Breadloaf Writers Conference. And so I was walking. You have to walk like a mile up this road that is no longer a road, to quote a poem of Robert Frost. And I fell into step with this woman who was a fiction writer, and she knew nothing about Robert Frost. And she said, "Tell me about Robert Frost." So I told her about his work for a while, and she said, "Yeah, but what was he like as a person?" I'm like, "You don't want to know." And she's like, "No, I want to know." So I started telling him like some of the stuff that I just told you, and she was just kind of appalled and just kept asking, "More, tell me more, tell me more." And by then we got to the cabin. We actually entered the cabin, and I'm still telling her like these nasty things about him inside his old house. And a spider bit me on the back of the neck, and it swelled up to like the size of half of a ping pong ball. And he has a famous poem about a spider as well, Design. And everybody was freaking out, saying, "Wyn, are you?" And I was feeling really weird too. I was like sweating and dizzy and whatnot. And everybody said, "We got to rush you to the hospital. We're going to carry you down the hill and get you down to the hospital in Middlebury." I'm like, no, I'm fine. I know who bit me. And I did get better later that day. Anyway, this is a book called Postcards from the Interior, and I had a former student who was guest editing a literary magazine, and he called me or wrote me, I can't remember. He got in touch with me and said, "Would you write a postcard poem from the town you live in?" I live in a little tiny town called Halifax, Vermont. Like 500 people live there. And so I wrote this poem, and it was so easy. And I said, "What do you mean, a postcard poem?" He said, "Just write a poem about someone or something quirky in your town." And I thought, well, that's pretty easy because everybody's quirky and everything's good. It's a weird town that we live in. And so I wrote this poem, and it took like an hour, and it was so easy that I just kept going. And I started writing postcard poems from other places in Vermont, like Robert Frost's grave, and various landmarks and things like that. And it was so much fun that I wrote nothing but postcard poems for 2 years, and I wrote about 200 of them. And I ended up writing ones from Vermont, and then from other places in the country, other places in the world, then postcards from outer space, postcards from emotions, things like that, until I had written 200 of these. Then I picked out the best 50 of them and made them into a book, and it got published. And So I will read you some of those. And I'm really into postcards too, so send me one. Most of them are too long to actually fit on a postcard. They're more like letters. But this one is very short, and I live on the Green River, and there's a little village also called Green River just down the road from our house. So this is called Postcard from Green River. The church towers over the village like a god. Imagine that. 3 of the residents are bad. No one knows the word for loud. And this is, I've got so many of these, I don't know which ones to read. I realize that I'm talking too much and not reading enough, so I'm going to skip over a few and get here. Okay, on Robert Frost's grave, not to, maybe I need to bury the hatchet, right? On his gravestone in Old Bennington, where I used to live, it's on his gravestone it says, "I had a lover's quarrel with the world," which is a line from one of his later poems. And so this is called Postcard from Robert Frost's Grave. Amy was crooning and Linda was swooning the night I brought them here. Her baritone led us in Irish songs of mourning, liquid as the Guinness which helped us sing. Linda asked that we show respect, but the director relieved himself behind 2 birches that grow near the grave. We were louder than fireworks on the 4th of July, which we watched from the end of the world. We sang along with Amy as Linda rubbed the stone. The northern lights lit up our thoughts, but cops arrived to shut us up. A lover's quarrel with the world, indeed. And this is a poem that I had the good luck to have Garrison Keillor read on the radio on his show. And it's called Postcard from Harmony Parking Lot, which is the parking lot where all the teenagers hang out in Brattleboro, which is the nearest real town to where I live. And I can't read it in as low a voice as he can, and I can't read a poem as slowly as he can, but I'll just read it the way I read it. Postcard from Harmony Parking Lot. The teens have gathered because they are teens. They wear brown shirts faded to beige, black boots, low-slung jeans. The way they stand is called jaunty. Cigarettes burn through their words, smoke blows through their hair, and the way they stare at passers-by blends reptile with bird, spleen with wonder, your past with their present to you. And this is called Postcard from the Rain. August, and the river looks like April, high as my chest and moving fast, green as the leaves it runs underneath. I follow its lazy curve to the dam where it falls hard to the pool below, in waves, a pulse. A family of 8 lives further down who only eat what they can grow, which this year's rain has killed. They're selling furniture on the lawn, chairs cobbled together with glue, lamps that don't work, for $1. I give them corn I bought at the store, not sweet like what they grew last year. So the first half of the book is Postcards from Vermont, and the second half is called Postcards from the Interior. And so this is where I start branching out to other places. And this one is called Postcard from the Bus. Notorious humbug, unlovely rider of buses everywhere, tell me you remember the night we met between Flint and Detroit, and I'll tell you exactly what you taught me, not to believe in the lives of saints, the death of God, or the genius of the insane, but to watch the moving dark for the lights of the next town, the one that's halfway there, halfway not, painfully close to the one I forgot. And here's an example of a poem that I wrote about a place that I still have never been. Postcard from Copenhagen. When I lived in Salt Lake City long ago, my neighbor had an ashtray of Hans Christian that had Hans Christian Andersen's house on the ashtray, and I didn't smoke, but I just loved this ashtray so much that he gave it to me, and I still have it. And so that's really all I know about Hans Christian. Anyway, you'll see. Postcard from Copenhagen. In Hans Christian Andersen's house, the light is blue, the climate dense. A thin vapor floats on the surface of every last word and glance. A narrow sidewalk circumscribes two sides of the building, a corner of cobblestone streets no one stops to smoke on anymore. In Hans Christian Andersen's house, no one can stay for long. The roof's too steep to climb except by beast, the chimney a crumbling 20-foot spire. No one understands desire, how it can make you skate away in winter and not come back. And then I'll end this book with Postcard from the Party, which is the last poem in the book, which has also been turned into a song by my songwriting collaborator, Madison Smart Bell. Postcard from the Party. You have to be invited, and there's nothing you can do to be asked. Headlines and bloodlines don't help. It's a long way from home, but I'm here, the view much better than I'm used to. How did this happen? Dumb but good luck, right place and time, the planets aligned. No contract, no deadline, no risk. And what did I do to deserve this? Slept with all the wrong people, gambled too much on friends of friends with light bulbs over their heads, wrote every day, no matter what. And then my newest book is Chaos is the New Calm, and I will read the title poem and a few other poems, and then a few new poems, and then we'll be done by 12:40, you said, right? By 12, oh, by 12, okay. 12:40 for questions. Okay, got it. Sorry, I'm a little scattered today. Chaos is the new calm. Got a little too much sun skiing yesterday. Anyway, chaos is the new calm. Chaos is the new calm, violence the new balm to be spread on lips unused to a kiss. Left is the new right as I brace for a fight with a man who stands on his remaining hand. Fetid harbor, harbor me until someone is free to drive me away from what happened today. Don't strand me standing here. If you leave beer. And that, when you get lucky like I did and have your poem turned into a Grammy-winning song that sells 10 million copies and blah, 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 everybody wants to write songs with you. And this poem has already been turned into songs by two different people they didn't ask me anything. They just sent me an MP3, via email saying, I made a song out of your poem. What do you think? And they're both really good. But how do and I haven't told the other one, the other person that somebody else has done this too, and I don't know what to do. Maybe call one Chaos is the New Calm and call the other just Chaos or something? I don't know. Not that anything will ever happen with those songs, but still, it was flattering, And this is a poem that is dedicated to my late friend Liam Rector, who was a very fine poet who killed himself 4 years ago, and I still miss him every day. And it's called Devices. Out of roiling darkness, the unruly starkness of what you didn't do, comes news of what you did, worse than I expected, your neglected self left to its devices. I miss you already, though you're still here, flaunting your style, your demeanor calm as the day I met you under an umbrella borrowed from a London hotel. And let's see here. And it's weird because I've never really liked this poem that much, but everybody who reads this book says it's their favorite poem in the book, so I guess I kind of feel obligated to read it, Finn. The stars are spare tonight, a line strung across the sky like buoys in the water that show how close to shore to sail and not hit rock. I never thought it would come to this, your cry on the phone brittle as November ice, the way you slammed the receiver down without a human sound. When I find our big bed, it's almost light. The stars have fallen onto the sheets, fallen down to sleep with me. I wasn't going to read this one, but I will. Pablo Neruda said that a poem. I'm going to get this wrong. I've got the quote in the back of the book. Neruda said that sonnets are little houses, which I just love that quote. And so I wrote a poem called Little Houses. I wrote a sonnet called Little Houses, in fact. Little houses in the woods, filled with ideas and words, try to move but are stuck to their cramped foundations. In summer, they're hidden from the gaze of tourists. In winter, are bare to every eye that wishes to see inside. Little houses realize they need go nowhere to make their presence felt, like felt on a pool table in their small town's bar. Only the 8-ball left to sink and everyone there to watch. Here we go. This has also been made into a song. This is called 3 Wrongs. In the deep hollow part of my deepest hollow, where even I don't go, 3 parts dark mix with 1 part light, and 3 wrongs make right. When the sun fades, I walk straight toward the light, colors that flash clockwise in circles, squares, shapes of buildings that invite my success. Tonight, all bets are off, the danger of wager too great at this instant, insistent nagging at the brain, the raise, the call, the crazy ritual of dollars and cents. I go back by starlight to the hollow. I follow the track I made in the dirt. I sing at the top of my one good lung. And I'm going to read one more poem from this book and then a few new poems for you. Most of my poems are completely made up, as I think most good poems are. But this one, something happened to me that was so unusual that I had to write a poem about it. And there's a great jazz saxophonist named Archie Shepp, who is one of my absolute heroes musically, and I listen to him a lot when I'm writing. I always listen to music when I write, but I try to listen mostly to jazz because I don't like other words, in the air when I'm trying to write words, but I like listening to just music. So I listen to him a lot, and I was lucky enough to meet him because a friend of mine was renting out his basement, and I went to see her. I didn't really get to see her. I was hoping that she was gone, and she was, and I got to hang out with him for a little while. So it's called Visiting Archie Shepp. I knocked on his Amherst door, unsure of what I might say if he answered. When he opened the door, he was talking on the phone in German, motioning for me to come in. He wore his usual 3-piece suit that hot June day, alone in his house, his saxophone and music stand at rest in the living room. The air was pungent with something foreign, his garden serene beyond the window. When he hung up the phone, it rang again, and he spoke French for a while, then put it down and asked who I was. Nobody, I said, and we talked for an hour. And sometimes it takes a good editor to tell you that you're actually doing more in your poems than you thought, because I wrote that poem and I thought the poem was good, and when I sent the manuscript in to my publisher, my editor there said that I just love the way you have that Emily Dickinson reference in this poem. And I'm like, what Emily Dickinson reference? And the poem ends, nobody, I said, and she's got a famous poem about, I am nobody. And I just didn't realize that. But, Archie lives in Amherst, and that's where she lived. What did Emily Dickinson get pulled over for? Recluse driving? Sorry. I got a million of them. Okay, I'm just going to read you a couple new poems, and then I will take your questions, if you have any. I hope you have some. This poem is called Viral. Click, click, click. Fingers on keyboards, not piano, but computer. Report instead of song. No chorus or bridge, just suggestions to improve efficiency. On the grass outside corporate headquarters, the homeless man with a discarded guitar writes a sad song to help erase the one he's been living too long. A passerby records it into her phone and posts it online. His song is heard by a boy in Tehran, a guard in Korea, a barmaid in London. He's famous for 3 minutes, but doesn't know it. Starts gathering bottles for their deposits, cigarette butts for what they have left that he might use, his muse. I also write a lot of poems that have to do with modern art, especially with abstract expressionism, which is what I'm really kind of preoccupied with for what reason I do not know. I've got 2 of these. I'm trying to decide which one to read you. Actually, I'll read this one, is the newest one of the 2, so I'll read that because I've never read this to a room of people. And this, the epigraph for this poem comes from the sculptor Carl Andre. The poem is called My Idea, and the quote of his that I use is, "My idea of a piece of sculpture is a road." And the poem goes, "My idea of heaven is a road that winds and winds toward home. My idea of a car is not a car in a showroom, shiny and still. My idea of color is evergreens against a blue sky, snow below. My idea of ideas is vague, conceptual, fragmentary, fluid. My idea of galactic travel is a road through space. My idea of space is what I'm in. My idea of leaving is unacceptable. My idea of the unknowable is something I know too well. My idea of a basket is your lap. My idea of a lap is your lap. My idea was to steal your ideas until I became you." And then I will end with this poem, which has special meaning, I suppose. I'm here in Utah for 10 days. This is my only work that I'm doing. I'm mostly skiing. My wife is here doing a little bit of work and mostly skiing. But we are planning to move to Utah sometime this year or next year, and she has already been applying for jobs around Salt Lake and so on. Anyway, when we started talking about moving here, I, of course, wrote a poem about having moved to Utah and then going back to Vermont to visit and wondering if we'd made the wrong decision. So it's like, and this poem, I was lucky enough to have this poem appeared on Slate. And if you like to read poems online, Slate is a really good place to do that. Slate.com. Robert Pinsky is the poetry editor. He picks a different poem every week. So every Tuesday morning, a new poem appears. You can read the poem. You can listen to it read by the poet. And you can make comments on it. Anybody can make comments. And so the first time I had a poem on there, the comments were just awful. Everybody just hated my poem. But of course, I wanted to be on Slate again, so I sent him this poem, and he published it just, I don't know, a month or 2 ago, and the comments were better, so I was happy about that. But a lot of people read your poem there, and like I said, anybody can comment. And you can there's a really interesting thread of comments because there's some very intelligent people making very intelligent comments on the poems, and there's also a few people that are, well, I won't. I'm not supposed to swear, so I won't call them anything. Losers. This poem is called Movement. The countryside's alive with movement. A murder of crows flies over us. Cows in a field walk in line instead of side by side. Tractor slowly plows another field. Cars drive by from time to time. Robins soar from tree to telephone line, which sways under their feathery weight, making local conversations hazy. Branches and leaves flap in a wind that blows circles of dust into the air, clogs our lungs and makes us cough until we see clouds coming fast. We laugh and laugh, the weather's why we left, then dredge up stories from the years we lived here among cows and plows and pines, before we settled in a city of other movements, found new rhythms that suit us better, we tell ourselves over and over. Thank you. and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about anything. Politics, art, sports, but especially poetry. That's my specialty. No? Yeah.
Did you always want to become a poet?
I wrote a poem in 5th grade, and we had our own school newspaper in my elementary school, and they published my poem when I was in 5th grade, which I still remember and will not quote to you for any amount of money. Well, okay, I take that back. And so I got a poem published when I was in 5th grade, and then when I was in 8th grade, I was going out with a girl that was in 7th grade, and I wrote a poem about the death of my mother, who is still alive and 88 years old. But it was just one of these things. That's, I made up this poem about the death of my mother. I showed it to my girlfriend. She showed it to her mother, who was one of the producers of WXYZ radio station in Detroit. And the DJ read the poem over the air while my mom was listening. And I was in school that day, and I got home, and Mom's like, "So, I'm dead, huh?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I heard your poem." I'm like, "What poem?" She said, "That poem you must have given to Maggie Timko." So anyway, I just was via the wonders of Facebook, I finally got in touch with Maggie, because she has a different last name now, and so I never knew how to find her. And we finally found each other on Facebook, and I told her this story, and she has no memory of it whatsoever. So I hope I'm not making it up. I'll ask my mom. Somebody else? So anyway, I hope that answered. So just the fact that I had a poem published when I was very young, and then a poem read on the radio, and then I got into a college class when I was in high school and had to commute down into downtown Detroit and got to take a poetry workshop when I was 17 or whatever. And I just I felt like that was something I was good at, and I just wasn't all that good at anything else. So I just kind of stuck with it, and it's worked out pretty well. Yeah.
You said that you started writing postcard poems for, over the course of the year, and how you get into these forms and things like that. I'm just wondering if you find yourself writing in categories. You find yourself writing in either, concepts or themes, or maybe social, commentary, or forms of poetry. Do you find yourself getting into, patterns with that as you write?
Yeah, I do, and it's weird because when I wrote the 200 postcard poems, and I literally didn't write any other kinds of poems for 2 years, I didn't know whether I was in a rut or whether I was on a roll, because you could kind of look at it both ways, because a lot of the poems were terrible. I mean, I only published 50 out of 200 poems, so a lot of them were just bad. I don't really have, I mentioned writer's block earlier, but I don't really have writer's block. I just read this great quote from the poet William Stafford the other day. He said, "There's no such thing as writer's block. It's just a matter of lowering your standards," which is just brilliant. And apparently that's what I do. But anyway, so then when I wrote The Chaos is the New Calm, my last book, I wrote 300 14-line poems. And I literally, no matter, I would sit down and try to write a long poem. The poem just always ended at the 14th line. It just stopped, and it was like the perfect ending. And I'm like, I guess I better go with this, And so I wrote 300 of those. And really, by the end of 2 books of writing just 2 kinds of poems, for over a 5-6 year period or whatever it was, I was just so sick of it that now I'm just writing poems that are 2 lines long, poems that are 40 lines long. I'm just going all over the place. Some of the lines are this long, so the lines are this, I'm just going everywhere and trying to be as, I don't know what word I'm looking for. Just trying to do everything in poetry right now, and hoping that it works. So, and it's 12:50. Right? Thank you all.